It was a morning like any other, the sky barely lit by the first rays of the sun. The planet they had landed on was nothing but a vast wasteland, covered in endless white dust. For a long time it had been thought to be uninhabited, a lost world. But David, along with his small crew, was here to investigate. They weren't expecting anything extraordinary, just a typical mission, some data collection, maybe a few ancient ruins. No one anticipated finding anything significant. David, standing among the cold ruins, looked around at the shattered remnants of what once might have been a great civilization. The wind whipped at his face, blowing dust into his eyes, making the place feel even more desolate. It was eerie, the silence of the planet wrapping around him like a heavy blanket. His team had scattered to conduct their scans, but David was alone now, walking through the ruins, studying the markings on the broken walls. His boots crunched over the frozen ground, his breath visible in the cold air. It was a strange place. The alien architecture, what little was left of it, was unlike anything David had ever seen. Still, it was a world that seemed to hold no life, no signs of any inhabitants left. It was almost as though the planet itself was waiting for something or someone to remember it. He paused in front of a large stone structure, half buried in the snow. Something about it seemed different, not like the rest of the wreckage. As he approached, he noticed strange symbols carved into the stone. Curiosity got the better of him, and he crouched down to inspect them more closely. The symbols were unlike anything he recognized. They seemed to pulse with an eerie glow, faint but present, as if the planet itself was still alive in some way. But before he could study them further, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around, expecting to see one of his team members, but instead, there was a figure standing in the distance. At first, he thought it was another of the crew, but as the figure drew closer, David realized that it wasn't human at all. It was a woman, but not like any woman he had ever seen. She was tall, her skin a deep shade of blue, glowing faintly under the dim light of the cold sun. She wore a suit of silver armor that shimmered as she moved, and her eyes were like nothing he'd ever seen. They were the color of ice, an intense, unnatural blue that seemed to see right through him. David stood frozen, his breath catching in his throat. There was something about her that made him feel small, as if he wasn't meant to be here in this place. The woman didn't speak at first. She just watched him with those piercing eyes. And then, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "You did this, human," she said, her voice calm but filled with an ancient, sorrowful weight. David's heart skipped a beat. The words hung in the air between them, chilling him to the bone. He didn't understand. What was she talking about? He hadn't done anything. He was just here to explore, to collect data, not to destroy. His mouth went dry and he struggled to find the words to respond. I don't understand. What do you mean?" he stammered, trying to make sense of what was happening. The woman's gaze didn't waver, and she stepped closer. Her presence seemed to fill the space around him, her sorrowful expression making him feel even more helpless. "You humans, you come to worlds like mine, take what you want and leave nothing behind," she continued. "You've destroyed everything, and now look at what's left. There's nothing." David felt a wave of guilt wash over him, even though he didn't know what she meant. He had nothing to do with whatever had happened to her planet, but her words hit him harder than he could have ever imagined. He had heard the rumors of human expansion, of taking resources from other worlds without thinking of the consequences. But he had never thought it was something real, something that would come back to haunt him. "I didn't do it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't a part of this." The woman didn't respond immediately. She simply stared at him, her eyes full of sorrow and pain, as though she had heard this excuse countless times before. Finally, she shook her head. "You can deny it all you want, but the truth is there in the ruins. Your kind is responsible. You've taken too much and now there's nothing left. No one left." David's throat tightened, the weight of her words sinking in. He wanted to say something, anything, to make it right, but he couldn't. The guilt was too much. He stood there, frozen in the cold, unable to speak, unable to explain. The woman turned away from him, her long silver hair flowing behind her like a ghost, the soft clinking of her armor the only sound breaking the silence. As she walked away, she muttered just one more thing, her voice barely audible over the wind. "It's too late for us, but maybe you can stop it from happening again." David stood in the snow, staring after her, his heart heavy with a new understanding of the cost of humanity's actions. He didn't know how, but something inside him knew that the words she had spoken weren't just for her world, but for his own. And in that moment, he realized that it wasn't just a mission anymore. It was a reckoning. The wind howled through the desolate ruins, carrying with it the biting cold of a forgotten world. David pulled his jacket tighter around his body as he walked across the barren landscape, his boots crunching against the snow-covered ground. He had always dreamed of exploring new worlds, of discovering ancient secrets hidden away in distant corners of the universe. But this planet, this wasteland, felt different. There was no life here, no sign of the once great civilization that had once thrived on its surface, just emptiness. David and his small crew had landed a few hours ago, excited to begin their mission. They were here to collect data, study the remnants of a lost world, and perhaps uncover some piece of forgotten history. But as he walked through the ruins, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The place felt haunted. The silence was deafening, almost as if the planet itself was holding its breath. He paused in front of a collapsed stone structure, its sharp edges jagged against the dull sky. There were markings on the walls, strange symbols that he couldn't understand. His hand reached out instinctively to touch them. The moment his fingers brushed against the cool surface, a cold shiver ran down his spine, as if the planet itself had come alive under his touch. Suddenly, there was a movement in the distance. David turned quickly, expecting to see one of his crew members approaching, but instead, his breath caught in his throat. A figure stood in the distance, emerging from behind a pile of rubble. It was a woman. At least that's what David thought at first. But as she drew closer, he realized she wasn't like anyone he had ever seen before. She was tall and regal, her skin a glowing shade of blue, like the ice of a frozen world. Her long, platinum hair flowed behind her like a silver waterfall. She wore intricately designed armor that shimmered with an otherworldly glow, its surface reflecting the pale light of the sun. David froze. She was beautiful, but there was something unnerving about her. The way she moved, so fluid and graceful, as if she were made of something ancient and powerful. Her eyes locked onto his, a piercing blue that seemed to see right through him. His heart pounded in his chest as she approached him, her gaze never wavering. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. There was an energy in the air, a tension that made it hard to breathe. His mind raced, trying to understand who or what she was. Had she been a survivor from the ancient civilization? Was she a part of the history he had come to study? But before he could gather his thoughts, the woman spoke. "You did this, human," she said, her voice soft, yet filled with an intensity that made David's blood run cold. David blinked, his mind struggling to process the words. "I what?" he stammered, his throat dry. "I don't understand." The woman took another step closer, her eyes still fixed on him. "You did this," she repeated, her voice now tinged with sorrow and anger. "Your kind came here and you destroyed everything." David's stomach twisted. He had no idea what she was talking about. He wasn't responsible for the destruction of this world, was he? He had only just arrived. His team hadn't found any signs of life. They were just here to explore, to understand. But the way she spoke, the pain in her voice, it made him feel like he had somehow failed her world, even though he knew nothing about it. "I swear I didn't do anything," David said, his voice shaking. "I'm just here to study. We didn't come to destroy, we came to learn." But the woman didn't seem to hear him. She stared at him with those deep, sorrowful eyes, and for a moment, David felt like he was drowning in her gaze. The weight of her words pressed down on him, heavier than the snow that fell softly around them. You humans, she said quietly, her voice filled with quiet grief. You think you can take from others, use their power, and leave nothing behind. You've destroyed my world, my people. David took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt like the ground beneath him had cracked open, and he was falling into an abyss of guilt and confusion. He had never meant for any of this to happen, but somehow her words made it feel like he was part of the destruction, even if he hadn't been there for it. The woman's expression softened just slightly. There is nothing left for us, she said, her voice low, almost resigned. And now there is nothing left for you. David wanted to scream, to deny everything, to say that he hadn't done anything. But the words wouldn't come. He felt small, insignificant, standing before her. The air around them seemed to thicken, and for a brief moment he thought he might suffocate under the weight of her stare. Finally, the woman turned away, her silver armor reflecting the light like a ghost. "It's too late for us," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "But maybe, just maybe, you can stop it from happening again." David watched as she disappeared into the ruins, the haunting words still ringing in his ears. "You did this." He had no answers, no explanations, just guilt, and the weight of a truth he didn't fully understand. David stood frozen in the snow, staring after the woman as she disappeared into the ruins. The wind howled around him, but he barely noticed. Her words echoed in his head, repeating over and over. "You did this, human." The weight of them pressed on his chest, suffocating him. What did she mean? He hadn't done anything. His team hadn't destroyed anything. They were just here to study. He took a few shaky steps backward, trying to push the unsettling feeling in his chest away. But it wouldn't leave. He felt the sting of her accusation, even though he hadn't been part of whatever had happened here. And yet, he couldn't escape the guilt that clung to him now. The air felt thicker, colder, and the ruins around him seemed to close in. It was like the planet itself was angry, as if it held a grudge against humanity. David ran a hand through his hair, trying to calm himself. He needed to focus. He had a job to do. But every time he thought about the woman's eyes, those piercing, sorrowful blue eyes, he felt like he was being dragged back into that moment, back into the hopelessness of it all. He turned and hurried toward the area where the rest of his team was conducting scans. The crew was made up of a few scientists, a couple of engineers, and a medic, all here for the same reason, to study the remnants of this long-lost civilization. They hadn't expected any survivors. They hadn't expected her. When David found the team, they were busy analyzing strange artifacts they'd discovered in the nearby ruins. The team leader, Captain Alvarez, looked up as David approached. "Everything okay, David?" she asked, sensing the unease in his posture. "You look like you've seen a ghost." David shook his head, but he could feel the knot in his stomach tightening. How could he explain what had happened? How could he describe the woman, the sadness in her voice, the way she had accused him? He didn't even understand it himself. I met someone," he said, his voice rough. "A woman. She's not human, though. She said we destroyed everything here." Alvarez raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, destroyed everything? We're here to study. The planet's uninhabited." David swallowed hard. "She said we did it, that humans came here before and took everything, destroyed her people, and left nothing behind." Alvarez frowned. "David, I think you're just shaken up. We don't know the full history of this place. We're still investigating. You probably misunderstood her." But David couldn't shake the image of the woman's face. Those eyes. There was no mistaking it. She had been angry, yes, but it wasn't just anger. It was pain, sorrow, and something deeper. Something that made him feel like he was standing in front of the past itself, accountable for something he hadn't even known about. He wanted to argue, to make them understand, but something inside him knew that it wasn't that simple. The woman wasn't just angry. She was a witness to something terrible. And he could feel it in his bones that whatever had happened here, it had been the doing of his people, humans. He took a deep breath and looked at his team. "I need to go back. There's something I have to find. I have to know what really happened here." Alvarez gave him a worried look but nodded. "All right, we'll keep working here. Just be careful, David." David didn't respond. He turned on his heel and began walking back toward the ruins where he had first encountered the woman. His mind raced with questions. What was she talking about? Had humans really done something so terrible? His crew had always been taught that humanity was the force of progress, discovery, and exploration. They came to new worlds, they explored, and they left nothing but knowledge behind. But what if that wasn't true? What if, in the quest for discovery, humans had caused harm, destroyed things they didn't understand? As he made his way back, the cold air seemed to press down on him more, as if the planet was watching, waiting for him to uncover the truth. The wind whipped against his face, but he barely noticed. His thoughts were consumed by the woman and the accusation she had made. He had to find answers. He had to understand. He couldn't just leave, not when he was now part of this story, whether he wanted to be or not. The ruins stood before him, silent and haunting. He stepped cautiously into the heart of them, scanning the surroundings for any sign of the woman. But she was gone. Only the faintest echo of her presence lingered, a chill in the air, a reminder of the pain she had carried with her. David walked deeper into the ruins, feeling the weight of his own uncertainty and guilt. He didn't know what he would find, but something told him he wasn't going to like it. The past had a way of finding you, and sometimes it wasn't kind. He needed to know. He needed to find the truth. And no matter how painful it was, he wasn't going to walk away from this mission until he did. David stood still in the middle of the ancient ruins, the chill in the air seeping into his bones. He had searched for hours, trying to find something, anything that would explain what had happened to this world. The more he searched, the more questions piled up. He felt like he was standing on the edge of something huge, something dark, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to know the truth anymore. The silence of the place was overwhelming, suffocating. It felt like the ruins themselves were watching him, waiting for him to uncover the past they held so tightly. He could still feel the weight of the woman's gaze, even though she was gone. Those piercing blue eyes that had looked right through him, accusing him without saying a word. "You did this, human." Her voice echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of the guilt he couldn't shake. David wandered deeper into the ruins, his footsteps muffled in the snow. He felt lost, both physically and mentally. The further he went, the more everything seemed to blur together. The walls, the carvings, the strange symbols, they all started to look the same. It was as though the planet itself was hiding its secrets, wrapping them in layers of ancient dust. He paused in front of a massive stone structure that stood out from the rest. Unlike the others, this one seemed untouched by time, as if it had been preserved on purpose. The surface of the stone was smooth, its edges sharp, and at the base a set of glowing symbols pulsed softly. David crouched down, staring at them. There was something familiar about the symbols. He couldn't understand them, but they seemed important, almost alive. His heart raced as he realized the markings were the same ones he had seen earlier, the ones the woman had stood near. She had touched them, perhaps even activated them in some way. David reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold stone. A strange warmth spread through his fingertips, and suddenly the symbols flared to life. The ground beneath him trembled just slightly, but enough to make him step back in alarm. The air around him shifted, growing heavier. It felt as though the ruins themselves were awakening, revealing something long buried. The symbols on the stone began to rearrange, shifting into new patterns, and for the first time, David understood what they were saying. "The power of the ancients, it will destroy you all." David's breath caught in his throat. The words made no sense, yet they felt so real. He had only touched the stone for a moment, but it felt as though the very soul of the planet had reached out and spoken to him. The message was clear now. The destruction of this world hadn't been an accident. It was something deliberate, something much larger than he had realized. Suddenly, a voice broke through the silence, making David jump. It was a voice he knew too well. "You found it, didn't you?" David turned quickly. The woman stood there again, her blue eyes glowing with an intensity he hadn't seen before. This time, there was no anger in her gaze, only sadness. She was closer now, standing in the shadows of the massive stone structure, her form barely visible against the darkness. "Why are you here?" David asked, his voice rough with confusion. "What happened to your people? Why did you say I did this?" The woman stepped forward, her face softening as she approached him. "I told you that you destroyed everything," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I didn't mean you, not you personally. It's humanity as a whole. You came here and you took from us." David felt his stomach tighten. Took what? Her eyes darkened. "The power, the very thing that gave us life. You took it and you used it for yourselves without understanding the consequences. This planet, my world, was once a place of peace, of balance. But your kind came and sought the power beneath the surface, and you destroyed us." David's heart pounded in his chest. The truth was beginning to unfold, but it wasn't what he expected. "We didn't know," he said, his voice filled with regret. "We had no idea." She nodded as though she had expected that answer. "Of course, you didn't. Your people didn't come here with malice. But in your search for knowledge and power, you tore apart something sacred, something that had kept us alive for millennia." David could feel the weight of her words sinking in, like stones being thrown into his chest. His mind raced, trying to piece together what she was saying. "So, your people, they were destroyed because of us, because of what humans did." The woman's expression softened further, and for the first time David saw the pain in her eyes, not just the anger. "Not just destroyed. We were changed. The power you took, it didn't just give you what you wanted. It took from us too. It twisted us, turned us into something we weren't. And in the end, we were nothing. My people, my family, they all became monsters." David's stomach churned. He had heard stories of ancient civilizations destroying themselves, but this was different. This wasn't just the collapse of a society. This was something far darker, far more personal. The woman's grief was palpable, and David felt every bit of it. He wasn't just standing in the ruins of a lost civilization. He was standing in the shadow of a mistake that humanity had made, a mistake that had cost lives. "You did this, human," she repeated softly, but there was no malice in her voice now, only sorrow. "And now you must live with the consequences." David swallowed hard, his throat tight. He wanted to deny it, to say that he had nothing to do with it, that it wasn't his fault. But deep down, he knew. The truth was undeniable. Humanity had taken too much, and now the cost was too high. David stood in the cold, the words of the woman echoing in his mind. "You did this, human." It wasn't the first time he had heard those words, but this time they hit harder. It was as if the weight of an entire civilization's destruction was pressing down on him, suffocating him. He had never felt more helpless in his life. He turned away from the woman, his eyes scanning the ruins around him. The stones, the fallen pillars, the broken carvings, they all seemed to hold secrets, secrets that had been buried for so long. But now, in the silence of this forgotten world, the truth was being forced to the surface. David had no idea how to process it, how to come to terms with the fact that humanity, his people, were responsible for the fall of an entire civilization. The woman's voice broke through his thoughts again. "You took everything from us," she said, her tone softer now, as though she had said these words 1,000 times before. "The power you found, it wasn't just knowledge, it was our lifeblood. It was the reason we thrived. And you took it all without understanding the cost." David's hands clenched into fists. He couldn't breathe. Every part of him wanted to deny what she was saying, but the truth was starting to sink in. He had no answers, no way to undo what had been done. And yet, here he was, standing in the ruins of a civilization that had paid the ultimate price for humanity's greed. The woman's eyes softened as she stepped closer. She looked tired, as if the weight of her world had finally caught up to her. "You didn't know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You couldn't have known, but now you have a choice." David didn't respond. He couldn't. The guilt was too much to bear. He had come here to explore, to learn, to uncover the mysteries of an ancient world. But now, the mission had taken on a new meaning. He wasn't just here to study history. He was part of that history, and it was a history that would never be forgotten. The woman continued, her gaze steady. "You can walk away, David. You can go back to your ship, return to your people, and pretend like this never happened. But you will know the truth. You will know that your kind destroyed us. You will carry that with you always." David shook his head, his chest tight. He couldn't walk away. He couldn't pretend. It wasn't that simple. What had happened here, what humanity had done, was too important to ignore. It wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about the future of humanity, the future of every world that came after. The woman reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. "Or," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind, "you can stay. You can help us. You can stop it from happening again." David looked up at her, his eyes wide with confusion. "How?" he whispered. "How can I possibly fix this? How can I make it right?" She stared at him for a long moment, and for the first time he saw something other than pain in her eyes. There was hope there, a glimmer of something long forgotten. "There is still power here," she said, her voice growing stronger. "The same power your people took. It can be destroyed, wiped out, so that no one can ever use it again. But you will have to stay. You will have to be the one to make sure it's done." David's heart raced as the weight of her words settled in. He had come to this planet to learn, to discover. But now his purpose had changed. This wasn't just about exploration anymore. It was about redemption, about making sure the mistakes of the past didn't repeat themselves. He looked at the woman, her face soft yet filled with the same sorrow he had seen since their first meeting. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'll stay. I'll make sure this never happens again." The woman nodded, her expression softening. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You may not be able to undo the damage that's been done, but you can make sure no one else suffers the way we have." David took a deep breath, steeling himself for the task ahead. He didn't know what he would find or how he would destroy the power the woman spoke of. But one thing was clear: he couldn't leave. Not now. Not when the future was at stake. As the wind howled around them, David took his first step toward the heart of the ruins, knowing that whatever came next, he had to see it through. He was no longer just a visitor to this world. He was part of its story, and he would do whatever it took to make sure that story ended differently. David stood in the cold, the words of the woman echoing in his mind. "You did this, human." It wasn't the first time he had heard those words, but this time they hit harder. It was as if the weight of an entire civilization's destruction was pressing down on him, suffocating him. He had never felt more helpless in his life. He turned away from the woman, his eyes scanning the ruins around him. The stones, the fallen pillars, the broken carvings, they all seemed to hold secrets, secrets that had been buried for so long. But now, in the silence of this forgotten world, the truth was being forced to the surface. David had no idea how to process it, how to come to terms with the fact that humanity, his people, were responsible for the fall of an entire civilization. The woman's voice broke through his thoughts again. "You took everything from us," she said, her tone softer now, as though she had said these words 1,000 times before. "The power you found, it wasn't just knowledge, it was our lifeblood. It was the reason we thrived. And you took it all without understanding the cost." David's hands clenched into fists. He couldn't breathe. Every part of him wanted to deny what she was saying. But the truth was starting to sink in. He had no answers, no way to undo what had been done. And yet, here he was, standing in the ruins of a civilization that had paid the ultimate price for humanity's greed. The woman's eyes softened as she stepped closer. She looked tired, as if the weight of her world had finally caught up to her. "You didn't know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You couldn't have known, but now you have a choice." David didn't respond. He couldn't. The guilt was too much to bear. He had come here to explore, to learn, to uncover the mysteries of an ancient world. But now the mission had taken on a new meaning. He wasn't just here to study history. He was part of that history, and it was a history that would never be forgotten. The woman continued, her gaze steady. You can walk away, David. You can go back to your ship, return to your people, and pretend like this never happened. But you will know the truth. You will know that your kind destroyed us. You will carry that with you always. David shook his head, his chest tight. He couldn't walk away. He couldn't pretend. It wasn't that simple. What had happened here, what humanity had done, was too important to ignore. It wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about the future of humanity, the future of every world that came after. The woman reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. Or, she said, her voice barely audible over the wind, you can stay. You can help us. You can stop it from happening again. David looked up at her, his eyes wide with confusion. How? He whispered. How can I possibly fix this? How can I make it right? She stared at him for a long moment, and for the first time he saw something other than pain in her eyes. There was hope there, a glimmer of something long forgotten. There is still power here, she said, her voice growing stronger. The same power your people took. It can be destroyed, wiped out so that no one can ever use it again. But you will have to stay. You will have to be the one to make sure it's done. David's heart raced as the weight of her words settled in. He had come to this planet to learn, to discover. But now his purpose had changed. This wasn't just about exploration anymore. It was about redemption, about making sure the mistakes of the past didn't repeat themselves. He looked at the woman, her face soft yet filled with the same sorrow he had seen since their first meeting. I'll do it, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I'll stay. I'll make sure this never happens again. The woman nodded, her expression softening. Thank you, she said quietly. You may not be able to undo the damage that's been done, but you can make sure no one else suffers the way we have. David took a deep breath, steeling himself for the task ahead. He didn't know what he would find or how he would destroy the power the woman spoke of. But one thing was clear, he couldn't leave. Not now, not when the future was at stake. As the wind howled around them, David took his first step toward the heart of the ruins, knowing that whatever came next, he had to see it through. He was no longer just a visitor to this world. He was part of its story, and he would do whatever it took to make sure that story ended differently. You said. Part 5. Word 700 ka leko, or interesting hunachea or third-person style, ma lekni ha, or simple basic English kai paragraph, ma proper emotional our attractive ho. ChatGPT said. Part 5. The Path to Redemption. David felt the weight of the decision he had made settle around him like a thick fog. There was no turning back now. The woman, whose face still haunted him, had given him a chance to fix what humanity had broken. He didn't know how he would do it, but he knew he couldn't walk away. Not after everything he had learned. Not after seeing the pain in her eyes, the loss that seemed to define this entire world. The ruins stretched out before him, cold and silent, as if they were waiting for him to take the next step. The woman had spoken of a power, a dangerous force that had once sustained her people but had now destroyed them. It was hidden deep within the planet, buried beneath layers of stone and forgotten history. He had to find it, understand it, and then somehow erase it. The thought of confronting something so powerful, so dangerous, sent a chill down his spine. But David knew it had to be done. He turned to look at the woman one last time. She stood a few feet behind him, her eyes watching him with a quiet intensity, as though she knew the weight of the task ahead of him. Her armor shimmered in the pale light of the dying sun, and for a moment, David almost thought she was a ghost, a memory of a time long past. But the look in her eyes told him she was very much real, and her pain was too raw to ignore. You're not alone in this, she said softly, as if reading his mind. I can help you. I can guide you to where it's hidden, but you'll have to do the rest. David nodded, swallowing the lump that had formed in his throat. I don't even know where to start. The woman stepped forward, her movements fluid and graceful despite the cold. Follow me, she said, her voice steady but filled with something he couldn't quite place. The path to the heart of this world is not an easy one. The power you seek is well guarded, but you must face it. You must destroy it or it will destroy you. David hesitated for a moment, then fell into step beside her. They walked in silence, the crunch of their footsteps the only sound in the still air. The further they went, the darker the ruins became. The walls seemed to close in around them, casting long, shadowy figures across the ground. David felt a sense of unease growing inside him, like they were walking deeper into something that didn't want to be found. The woman didn't speak as they moved through the ruins, but David could feel the weight of her presence. She was a part of this place, a part of its story, and yet she was also an outsider now. A survivor, one who had watched her people fade away, turned into something unrecognizable by the very power David now sought to destroy. Finally, after what felt like hours, they arrived at a massive stone door, ancient and weathered by time. The door was covered in strange markings, the same symbols that had been etched into the walls of the ruins. David stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch them. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, a faint hum vibrated through the air. The door began to move, slowly, grinding open as though it hadn't been disturbed in centuries. The woman stepped forward, her face grim. "This is it," she said quietly. "The power you seek lies beyond this door, the heart of this world, the source of everything that happened." David swallowed hard. He felt a surge of fear but also determination. This was it. This was what he had come for, what he had promised to do. He had to face whatever lay on the other side of that door. As the door opened wider, an intense heat washed over them. David stepped into the chamber beyond, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The air was thick with an ancient energy, a power that seemed to pulse from the very walls. In the center of the room stood a massive stone pedestal, its surface covered in glowing symbols. The power was here, embedded deep in the heart of the planet. David could feel it now, the same energy that had destroyed this world, the same energy that had twisted everything into something unrecognizable. He could almost hear the whispers in the air, the faint voices of the people who had once lived here, calling out in despair. "It's here," David whispered, his voice trembling. "This is the power." The woman nodded. "Yes, and now you must destroy it." David stared at the pedestal, feeling the pull of the power, the temptation to use it to understand it. But deep down, he knew that was the danger. This power was too great, too dangerous for anyone to control. It had destroyed an entire civilization, and if he didn't destroy it now, it could destroy everything else. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his hand hovering over the glowing symbols. His heart raced, but he pushed through the fear, focusing on the task ahead. The woman was right. He had no choice. The power had to be destroyed. As his fingers touched the surface of the pedestal, a surge of energy rushed through him, stronger than anything he had ever felt. The ground trembled beneath his feet and the walls of the chamber seemed to pulse with life. For a moment, David thought he might collapse under the weight of it. But then, he focused. He could feel the power coursing through him, but he could also feel the control slipping away. With a shout, he pressed down on the pedestal, and the power erupted around him, a blinding light filling the room. The energy seemed to scream in protest, but David held on, refusing to let it escape. He had to end it. He had to make sure that this power would never harm another world again. And then, with a final, deafening crack, the light exploded outward, and everything went dark. David stood alone in the center of the room, breathing heavily, his body shaking. The power was gone. The planet was still. It was over. David stood in the darkness, his heart pounding in his chest, the remnants of the blinding light still burning behind his eyelids. The chamber around him was silent, too silent. The air felt thick, heavy with the energy that had just been unleashed. He had done it. He had destroyed the power, but in that silence he wasn't sure what came next. He slowly opened his eyes, blinking against the darkness, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The pedestal was now shattered, its glowing symbols faded, leaving only a heap of broken stone. The hum of ancient power that had filled the room was gone. The silence now felt like a weight pressing down on him, suffocating him. He turned around, his eyes searching the room for any sign of the woman. She had been right there with him moments before, guiding him, urging him on. But now she was gone. Had she disappeared with the power, or had the destruction taken everything with it? For a long moment, David stood frozen in place, his mind racing. Was it truly over? Was the world truly safe now, or had he just unleashed something worse? His thoughts were a whirlwind, spinning faster and faster, and he felt like he was drowning in the uncertainty. Then, just as the weight of the silence began to feel unbearable, he heard a soft footstep behind him. He turned quickly, his breath catching in his throat, half expecting to see nothing. But there she was, the woman. She stepped out from the shadows, her face unreadable, her eyes still the same piercing blue. The sadness that had defined her expression before had softened, but there was still a deep, lingering sorrow there. "You did it," she said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "You destroyed it." David didn't know what to say. He opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. The aftermath of everything that had happened, the destruction, the loss, the power he had just erased, left him speechless. He had done what she asked, what he promised. But what did it mean? Was it enough? The woman stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "It's over now. The power is gone. The past can't hurt us anymore." David nodded slowly, though he wasn't sure he believed it. The weight of what he had done still hung heavily on him. He had destroyed a force that had caused unimaginable pain and suffering, but had he truly fixed anything? Was it really enough to make up for what had happened here? The woman seemed to read the doubt in his eyes. "You can't change the past," she said gently. "No one can, but you've stopped it from happening again. You've given us a chance to heal." David felt a tightness in his chest at her words. He had never truly understood the depth of the woman's loss until now. She had watched her world fall apart, watched her people suffer and fade away. And yet here she was, standing before him, offering something David couldn't quite grasp: hope. It was a fragile thing, but it was there, flickering in her eyes. "I didn't know," David whispered, his voice raw. "I didn't know how bad it was, how much you'd lost." The woman gave him a small, sad smile. "How could you? You're not the one who lived through it. You're the one who can change the future, and that's what matters now." David let out a shaky breath. He had come here to study, to explore, but what he had found was far beyond anything he had imagined. He hadn't just discovered an ancient civilization. He had uncovered a painful truth about the cost of humanity's mistakes. But now, as he stood in the ruins, staring at the shattered pedestal, he realized something else. He had a chance to help. A chance to make sure the mistakes of the past didn't repeat themselves. "What happens now?" David asked quietly, unsure if he even had the right to ask. The woman looked around at the ruins, her gaze lingering on the destruction, but there was no anger in her eyes, only a quiet acceptance. "Now," she said softly, "we rebuild. We heal. You did more than just destroy a power. You gave us the chance to start again." David felt something shift inside him. The guilt, the confusion, the doubt, they didn't disappear, but they were no longer as overwhelming. The woman was right. There was no going back, no undoing what had been done. But they could move forward. They could rebuild piece by piece, just like the shattered world around them. For the first time since he had arrived, David felt a glimmer of hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there. It was the chance to change the future, and he wasn't going to waste it. As the woman turned and walked toward the exit of the chamber, David followed her, his steps sure. There was still much to do, and the road ahead would not be easy. But for the first time, he felt ready to face it. The woman paused at the doorway and turned back to him, her expression calm but filled with gratitude. "Thank you, David. You've given us more than just hope. You've given us a future." David nodded, his heart heavy but his spirit lighter. The future was uncertain, but now, at least, there was a chance. And that was all anyone could ever ask for. The air was different now. Lighter somehow. It had been hours since the destruction of the power, and yet the weight of it all lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. David walked beside the woman, his eyes scanning the ruins one last time. The damage had been done. The pedestal was shattered, the power was gone, and with it, the haunting presence that had clung to the planet for so long. But despite all that, something felt new, as though a breath of life had finally returned to a world that had been suffocating for centuries. The woman led him toward the edge of the ruins, her footsteps quiet and steady. There was no anger in her anymore, no pain. The sadness was still there, deep in her eyes, but there was also something else, something like relief, even hope. It was as if the very air around them had changed, and for the first time, David didn't feel like he was walking in the shadow of an irreversible tragedy. Maybe they couldn't bring back what had been lost, but they could stop more pain from coming. "Where will you go now?" David asked, his voice quiet as they reached the base of a broken tower that seemed to reach for the sky like a desperate plea. He wasn't sure where he was heading or what his next step would be, but he knew he couldn't stay here. He had a duty to return, to report to his crew, to humanity. But part of him was afraid to leave, afraid of what would happen to this place once he was gone. The woman stopped, her eyes distant as she gazed at the horizon, where the first rays of dawn were beginning to break through the clouds. For a moment, it looked like she was lost in a memory, one too painful to share. Then she turned back to David, her expression softening. "I will stay here," she said, her voice low but filled with determination. "There are others scattered across the world, survivors. We will rebuild piece by piece. It will take time, but we will start again." David nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He had come here as an explorer, looking for knowledge, looking for answers to a history long forgotten. But what he had found was so much more. He had seen a civilization's downfall, a people twisted by power, and yet here they were, still standing, still fighting to survive. They hadn't given up, even after everything. "What will you do?" she asked, her gaze fixed on him now. David hesitated. His heart still ached from what he had learned. He had witnessed the devastation of a world, seen firsthand the price of humanity's mistakes, but he wasn't the one who had caused it. He hadn't even been alive when it happened. Still, it felt like a burden he couldn't shake. There was no going back, no undoing the damage, but there was one thing he could do. He could be the voice for this world, for these people. He could make sure that humanity learned from its past, that the mistakes made here wouldn't be repeated. "I'll go back," David said, his voice steady now, the uncertainty fading. "I'll tell them everything. I'll make sure the story is told, so that the mistakes of the past aren't forgotten." The woman studied him for a long moment, her blue eyes piercing, as if she could see every thought, every doubt in his mind. Then she gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't one of joy, but of quiet approval. "You've done more than just destroy the power," she said softly. "You've given us a chance to rebuild, to heal, and for that I thank you." David felt a lump form in his throat. He wasn't sure what to say. He hadn't come here to be thanked. He had come here to learn, to explore. But now he realized that the true value of discovery wasn't just in the facts or the knowledge. It was in understanding, in the connections made between people, between worlds. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything he had seen. "I didn't do it alone. I couldn't have done it without you." The woman nodded once, then turned her gaze back to the horizon. "We all have our parts to play. You've played yours. Now we must all move forward." David followed her gaze, watching the sun rise over the ruins. It was a beautiful sight, even in the midst of all the destruction. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times there was still light. The future wasn't lost. Not yet. "I won't forget," David said quietly, more to himself than to her. "None of us will." The woman didn't respond, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that told him she understood. Then, without another word, she began to walk toward the ruins once more, disappearing into the shadows of the broken world she had once known. David stood there for a long time, watching her go. He had thought that by coming here he would uncover the secrets of an ancient world, that he would learn something about the past. But what he had found was something deeper, something more important. The past was gone, but the future, it was still unwritten, and now it was up to him and to all of them to shape it. He turned away and began to walk back toward the shuttle. It was time to go home, time to report what he had learned. But in his heart, he knew that he wasn't just leaving a world behind. He was carrying its story with him, a story of pain, redemption, and the fragile hope of a new beginning.